The autumn wind swept through Nashville's Broadway, carrying with it the faint scent of barbecue from the honky-tonks and the distant sound of guitars echoing from every corner. The neon lights were just beginning to flicker on as the sun dipped behind the Cumberland River, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would make any artist reach for their brushes. Marcus Thompson sat cross-legged on the sidewalk outside Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, his weathered easel propped up before him, fingers stained with paint that never seemed to wash completely clean. At 19, he had the kind of focused intensity that came from necessity rather than choice. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he worked, occasionally brushing it back with the back of his hand, leaving small streaks of color that had become his inadvertent signature. "That's incredible, son," said an elderly tourist, stopping to admire the portrait Marcus was finishing. The painting captured a young couple from earlier that afternoon, their joy so vivid it seemed to leap from the canvas. "How much?" $25, sir," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had learned early that life wasn't always kind. He carefully signed the bottom corner with a flourish he had practiced countless times in the margins of school books he no longer owned. The man handed him $30 and walked away with his purchase, leaving Marcus to count his earnings for the day. $47. Enough for dinner at the shelter and maybe some new brushes if he was careful. He had learned to budget every penny since aging out of the foster system 3 years ago. As the evening crowd began to thicken, Marcus pulled out a photograph that had become his most faithful companion. It was creased and worn at the edges from being folded and unfolded so many times. The image showed a woman with flame-red hair and a smile that seemed to hold all the warmth in the world. Reba McEntire, the queen of country music. He had been painting her portrait from memory for weeks now, working on it between commissioned pieces for tourists. Something about her face captivated him. Not just her fame, but the genuine kindness he saw in her eyes during interviews, the way she spoke about her family, her losses, her triumphs. She represented everything Nashville meant to dreamers like him. "Working late again, Marcus?" Sarah Williams, a nurse at Vanderbilt Medical Center, stopped on her way home from her shift. She had commissioned a portrait of her late mother the month before and had become something of a regular, always checking on the young artist who reminded her so much of her own son. "Just finishing up for the day, Miss Sarah," Marcus said, quickly covering the Reba portrait with a cloth. He felt oddly protective of it, as if sharing it too soon might break whatever spell had possessed him while creating it. "You know, honey, I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice taking on that motherly tone that made Marcus both grateful and homesick for something he'd never really had. "There's a community college program for art students, scholarships available. I could help you with the application." Marcus's hand stilled on his brush. Education felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when every day was about survival. "I appreciate it, Miss Sarah. I really do. But I can't afford to not work. Even for classes." "Evening classes, Marcus. You could still paint during the day." She pressed a business card into his paint-stained palm. "Just think about it, okay?" As Sarah disappeared into the crowd, Marcus looked down at the card. Dr. Jennifer Patterson, Art Department, Nashville Community College. He tucked it carefully into his wallet, next to the photograph of his parents. The only thing he had left from before the car accident that changed everything. The streets were getting busier now, filled with bachelor parties, tourists, and locals heading out for their Friday night entertainment. Marcus began packing up his supplies, the ritual as familiar as breathing. Easel folded, brushes cleaned with a rag he'd been using for 2 months, paints carefully arranged in the metal box his foster father had given him for his 16th birthday, back when he still believed someone would adopt an older kid. As he loaded everything into his worn backpack, a group of college students stumbled by, loud and carefree in the way that only came with youth and money. One of them, a blonde girl in designer clothes, glanced at his setup with curiosity. "Oh my God, you're that street artist everyone's been talking about," she said, her words slightly slurred. "Emma was just showing us your Instagram. You're like famous or whatever." Marcus looked confused. Instagram. The girl pulled out her phone and showed him an account he'd never seen before. At Nashville Street Art had been posting photos of his work, including portraits he'd painted months ago. The account had over 10,000 followers. "I don't have an Instagram," Marcus said quietly. "Well, someone's been documenting your stuff. Look, this painting sold for like $200 on Facebook Marketplace last week." She scrolled through more posts, showing Marcus his own work being sold for prices that made his stomach tighten. After the students left, Marcus sat back down on the sidewalk, staring at the phone screen shot the girl had shown him. Someone was profiting from photographs of his art, selling pieces he'd painted for $25 for 10 times that amount. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not just the money he was losing, but the fact that his work was good enough that people would pay real money for it. He pulled out the Reba portrait and studied it in the yellow glow of the street lamp. The painting captured her mid-laugh, as if she'd just heard the best joke in the world. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and there was a warmth in her expression that made her seem like she was about to step right out of the canvas and sit down beside him. "Maybe I am better than I thought," he whispered to the painting, as if she could hear him. The wind picked up, sending a few drops of rain skittering across the concrete. Marcus quickly covered his work and hurried toward the shelter, the business card in his wallet seeming to grow heavier with each step. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to think about the future as something more than just surviving until tomorrow. Behind him, the neon lights of Broadway continued their eternal dance, painting the wet streets in blues and reds and golds. While somewhere in the distance, a guitar played a melody that sounded almost like hope. The Nashville Rescue Mission stood like a beacon against the darkness of Lafayette Street, its warm yellow lights spilling onto the sidewalk, where a line of people waited patiently for the evening meal service. Marcus had been calling this place home for 3 years now, and while it wasn't permanent, nobody could stay forever. It had become the closest thing to stability he'd known since losing his parents. "Marcus!" "There you are, son," called David Rodriguez, the shelter's evening coordinator, as Marcus pushed through the heavy front doors. David had been a fixture at the mission for over a decade, his graying beard and kind eyes making him a father figure to many of the young people who passed through these doors. "How was business today?" "Not bad, Mr. Rodriguez. $47. Marcus held up his earnings with a small smile. It was more than he'd made on a typical Friday, and David knew it. "That's fantastic, Marcus. You know Mrs. Chen in the kitchen? She's been asking about commissioning a portrait of her granddaughter for Christmas." Marcus nodded as he signed in on the clipboard. The routine was comforting. Name, time of arrival, assigned bed number. Bed 23 had been his for the past 6 months, ever since his previous bunkmate had found permanent housing. It wasn't much, a narrow cot with a thin mattress and a small locker for personal belongings, but it was safe, warm, and dry. The common room buzzed with quiet conversation as residents settled in for the evening. Some watched the old television mounted high on the wall. Others read donated books or worked on job applications at the computer station. Marcus made his way to his usual spot at one of the round tables near the window, where he could catch the last of the natural light while organizing his art supplies. "Hey, Marcus," came a soft voice from behind him. He turned to see Emma Foster, a 17-year-old who had arrived at the shelter 2 months ago after aging out of her foster placement. She was one of the few residents younger than him, and Marcus had taken her under his wing, sharing what little wisdom he'd gained about surviving on the streets. "Hey, Emma, how was the job interview today?" Emma's face fell slightly. "They said they'd call, but I don't know. I think they could tell I live in a shelter." She sat down across from him, pulling her oversized hoodie tighter around her thin frame. "Sometimes I wonder if it shows, you know? Like there's some kind of mark on us that regular people can see." Marcus understood that feeling all too well. The constant awareness that you didn't quite belong in the normal world, that your circumstances were written in the way you carried yourself, the careful way you counted change, the fact that you owned everything you needed in a single backpack. It doesn't show, Emma. And even if it did, that's their problem, not yours. He pulled out his sketchbook and flipped to a fresh page. "Want to help me with something?" Emma perked up. Marcus had been teaching her basic drawing techniques, and while she claimed to have no artistic talent, her sketches had been improving steadily. "What are you working on?" "A self-portrait." Marcus lied smoothly, not wanting to explain his obsession with painting Reba McEntire. "I need someone to tell me when the proportions look right." As Marcus began sketching, Emma watched with the fascination she always showed for his work. "I still can't believe you just see things and can put them on paper like that. It's like magic." "It's not magic," Marcus said, his pencil moving in confident strokes. "It's just paying attention, really looking at things instead of just seeing them." He glanced up at Emma. "Like right now. You think you're just sitting there, but your left shoulder is slightly higher than your right because you're tired from walking all day in shoes that don't fit properly. Your hands are clasped tighter than they need to be because talking about the job interview made you nervous. That's the kind of stuff you learn to notice if you want to capture people honestly." Emma looked down at her hands and laughed, relaxing her grip. "Okay, that's actually a little scary. What else do you see?" "I see someone who's scared but trying not to show it. Someone who's tired but hasn't given up. Someone who's been knocked down but keeps getting back up." Marcus's voice softened. "I see someone who's going to be okay, Emma. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the television. Several residents had gathered around, their voices rising with excitement. "Turn it up! Turn it up!" someone called out. The evening news was running a human interest story about local artists, and Marcus felt his heart skip when he saw familiar footage of Broadway street performers. The camera panned across several artists, lingering on paintings and sculptures, before settling on a shot that made Marcus's blood run cold. There on the screen was his Reba McEntire portrait, being held by a well-dressed woman identified as gallery owner Patricia Hartwell. The news anchor's voice carried clearly across the room. This remarkable portrait, painted by an unknown street artist, has been generating significant buzz in Nashville's art community. Miss Hartwell acquired the piece earlier this week and says she's eager to meet the mysterious artist. Marcus felt like he couldn't breathe. That was his painting, the one he'd been working on for weeks, the one he kept covered and protected. But he'd never sold it to anyone, never even shown it to anyone except Sarah. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice strained, "I need you to do me a favor. Can you ask around, very quietly, if anyone here has seen someone taking pictures of my artwork? Maybe while I was painting?" Emma's eyes narrowed with understanding. "Someone's been stealing your work?" "I think so. And not just taking pictures. I think someone actually took that painting." Marcus pointed at the television, where the news segment had moved on to weather. But the damage was done. His art was out there, being sold and discussed, and he wasn't seeing a penny of it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Marcus tried to focus on helping Emma with her sketching, on eating the hearty vegetable soup the kitchen staff had prepared, on the normal rhythms of shelter life. But his mind kept returning to that image on the television screen, his painting, his Reba, in someone else's hands. Later that night, as he lay in his narrow bunk listening to the quiet sounds of 40 other people sleeping, Marcus stared at the ceiling and made a decision. He couldn't keep letting people profit from his work while he scraped by on $25 commissions. He needed to find a way to protect his art, to control his own narrative. He thought about the business card Sarah had given him, tucked safely in his wallet. Maybe education wasn't such an impossible dream after all. Maybe it was the first step toward taking control of his life, his art, his future. In the bed next to him, Emma shifted restlessly in her sleep, and Marcus whispered a quiet prayer to whatever forces might be listening. For her, for himself, for all the people in this building who were fighting their own battles against circumstances beyond their control. Tomorrow, he decided, he would call Dr. Patterson. Tomorrow, he would start fighting back. The morning sun cast long shadows across Broadway as Marcus set up his easel in his usual spot. But everything felt different today. The business card for Dr. Patterson sat in his shirt pocket like a small weight, reminding him of the phone call he'd made an hour earlier from the payphone outside the shelter. Her voice had been warm and encouraging when he'd explained his situation, and they'd scheduled a meeting for Monday afternoon to discuss scholarship opportunities and evening class schedules. "You're here early today," observed Tommy Chen, the owner of Chen's Corner Market, as he swept the sidewalk in front of his store. Tommy had always been kind to Marcus, occasionally trading a sandwich for a small sketch, and his wife was the one David had mentioned wanting a portrait of her granddaughter. "Couldn't sleep," Marcus admitted, adjusting his canvas on the easel. He had started a new piece, a bustling street scene of Broadway itself, capturing the energy and chaos that made Nashville's music district so magnetic. As he worked, Marcus couldn't shake the image of his Reba portrait on the television screen. He'd asked around the shelter casually, and it hadn't taken long to get his answer. Jake Morrison, a man in his 30s who'd been staying at the Mission on and off for 2 years, had grown uncomfortable under questioning, and finally admitted to taking photos of Marcus's work and selling them online. "I didn't think you'd mind," Jake had said defensively. "You were just going to leave them there anyway, and I needed the money for my medication." Marcus understood the desperation. He really did, but it didn't make the betrayal sting any less. Jake had been selling photos, and even some of the smaller pieces that Marcus had left propped against the building while packing up. The Reba portrait, according to Jake, had been photographed and listed on Facebook Marketplace, where Patricia Hartwell had seen it and purchased it from someone who claimed to be acting on the artist's behalf. Now, as Marcus painted, he found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, protective of his current work in a way he'd never been before. Art had always been his escape, his pure space where he could lose himself in color and form and forget about empty stomachs and uncertain futures. Having that violated made him feel more vulnerable than ever. "Excuse me, are you the young man who painted that portrait of Reba McEntire?" Marcus looked up from his canvas to find an impeccably dressed woman in her 50s standing before him. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, and her expensive purse and shoes marked her as someone from a very different world than his own. Maybe, Marcus said carefully. "Are you the gallery owner from the news?" "Patricia Hartwell," she confirmed, extending a manicured hand. "I've been looking for you for 3 days. That portrait is extraordinary. The technique, the emotional depth, the way you captured her spirit, rather than just her appearance. I had to meet the artist." Marcus wiped his paint-stained hand on his jeans before shaking hers, acutely aware of the contrast between them. "I'm Marcus Thompson, and that painting was stolen from me." Patricia's expression shifted immediately from admiration to concern. "Stolen? but I purchased it legitimately from someone who said they were representing you. A man named..." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages. "Jake Morrison. Jake lives at the same shelter I do. He took pictures of my work without permission and sold them." Marcus's voice was steady, but Patricia could hear the hurt underneath. "I spent weeks on that portrait. It wasn't for sale." "Oh my God," Patricia said, sinking onto the folding chair that Tommy Chen had brought out from his store. "I had no idea. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I would never have purchased stolen artwork knowingly." She looked genuinely distressed. "What can I do to make this right?" Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but found only sincere regret. "I don't know. I want people to know it's my work, that I painted it." "Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to do more than that." Patricia leaned forward. "Marcus, your talent is remarkable." "Completely self-taught?" "Mostly. I had a good art teacher in high school before." Marcus trailed off, not wanting to get into the details of his foster care experience. "Well, whether you realize it or not, you have something special. That portrait has generated more interest than anything I've displayed in months. People aren't just impressed by the technical skill, though that's certainly noteworthy. They're moved by the emotional honesty of it." Patricia pulled out her business card. "I'd like to represent you properly, if you're interested. Gallery showing, legitimate sales, proper commissions." Marcus stared at the card. Hartwell Contemporary Gallery was one of the most prestigious art spaces in Nashville, the kind of place he'd only seen from the outside during his walks around the city. "I don't understand," Marcus said slowly. "Gallery artists they're people who went to fancy schools, who have connections and money and..." "Who have talent," Patricia interrupted firmly. "Everything else can be learned or acquired. But you can't teach what you have, Marcus. You either see the world the way you do, or you don't." She gestured toward his current painting. "Look at this street scene. You're not just painting buildings and people. You're capturing the soul of this place, the hope and struggle and dreams and disappointments that make Nashville what it is." As if summoned by their conversation, a familiar figure approached from down the street. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the confident walk, the distinctive red hair catching the morning sunlight. It was actually her, Reba McEntire herself, walking down Broadway like any other tourist, though Marcus noticed she was flanked by what appeared to be security personnel, maintaining a discreet distance. Patricia followed his gaze and smiled. "Well, this is perfect timing. Miss Hartwell." Reba's voice was exactly as warm as Marcus had imagined, with that slight Oklahoma accent that had made her famous. "I got your message about the portrait. I had to come see it for myself." Marcus felt like he was dreaming. The woman he'd been painting obsessively for weeks, the face he'd studied from photographs and interviews until he could recreate every line and expression, was standing 3 feet away from him. "Miss McEntire," Patricia said, "I'd like you to meet Marcus Thompson, the artist who created your portrait." Reba's eyes widened as she took in Marcus's appearance. The paint-stained clothes, the weathered easel, the obvious signs of his economic circumstances. But instead of the pity or discomfort Marcus had learned to expect from wealthy people, he saw genuine interest and respect. "Marcus," Reba said, extending her hand, "it's an honor to meet you." Patricia showed me a photo of the painting, and I have to say, it took my breath away. You managed to capture something in that portrait that I'm not even sure I see in myself. Marcus found his voice, though it came out smaller than he intended. You represent everything I love about music, about Nashville, about what it means to dream big even when everything seems impossible. Reba's expression softened. "Honey, tell me about your story. How did you come to be painting portraits on Broadway?" And so, standing there on the sidewalk where he'd spent countless hours hoping for enough commissions to eat that day, Marcus found himself telling his story to one of the most famous women in country music. He told her about his parents, about foster care, about aging out of the system, with nothing but his art supplies and an unshakable belief that somehow, someday, things would get better. As he spoke, a small crowd began to gather, people recognizing Reba and curious about the conversation. But she seemed oblivious to the attention, focused entirely on Marcus's words. "Where are you staying now?" she asked when he finished. "The Nashville Rescue Mission," Marcus said, then quickly added, "It's a good place. Safe. The people there look out for each other." Reba nodded thoughtfully. "And what's your dream, Marcus? If you could do anything, be anything, what would it be?" Marcus glanced at the business card in his pocket, then at Patricia, then back at Reba. "I want to go to school, learn everything I can about art, about business, about how to make a living doing what I love. I want to help other kids like me understand that having talent doesn't have to be enough. You can build skills on top of it, create opportunities instead of just waiting for them." "That's exactly the right answer," Reba said, and something in her tone made Marcus look up sharply. There was a determination in her eyes that suggested this conversation was about to become something much bigger than a chance encounter on the street. The coffee shop Reba had chosen for their follow-up meeting was a far cry from the bustling chaos of Broadway. Tucked into a quiet side street in Music Row, Frothy Monkey felt intimate and safe, the kind of place where conversations could happen without the constant interruption of tourists and street performers. Marcus sat across from Reba and Patricia, still struggling to believe this was really happening. "I've been thinking about our conversation all weekend," Reba began, wrapping her hands around her mug of coffee. She'd dressed down for this meeting. Jeans, a simple sweater, minimal makeup. But she still carried that unmistakable presence that came with decades in the spotlight. "Patricia told me about your situation with the stolen artwork, about Jake, about the shelter. It got me thinking about my own story." Marcus leaned forward, curious. Everyone knew Reba's success story, but he sensed she was about to share something more personal. "I grew up in Oklahoma, and we didn't have much," Reba continued. "My daddy was a rodeo cowboy. Mama worked whatever jobs she could find. When I first came to Nashville in the late 70s, I was 22 years old with $40 in my pocket and a head full of dreams that probably seem just as impossible as yours do right now." She paused, looking out the window at the tree-lined street. "I slept in my car more nights than I care to remember, sang in dive bars for tips, had people tell me my voice was too country, not country enough, too different, not different enough. But I had people who believed in me, Marcus. People who saw something worth investing in." Patricia nodded. "Reba's told me she wants to do something similar for you." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, though his heart was already starting to race with possibilities. Reba leaned back in her chair, and Marcus could see her switching into business mode. The expression of someone who had built an entertainment empire through more than just talent. "I want to sponsor your education. Full scholarship to Nashville Community College for their art program, with the understanding that if you maintain good grades, we'll look at transferring you to a 4-year program after that." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. What? "But that's just the beginning," Reba continued. "Patricia and I have been talking, and we think there's an opportunity here that could benefit everyone. You need education and stability. Patricia needs fresh talent for her gallery. And she smiled, "I need someone who understands what it means to struggle, Someone who can help me with a project I've been planning for years." She pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a series of photos, empty buildings, architectural plans, sketches of interior designs. "I've been wanting to establish an arts foundation for at-risk youth, a place where kids aging out of foster care, homeless teens, young people who've been written off by the system can come to develop their talents. Art, music, writing, theater, whatever speaks to them." Marcus stared at the images. That's incredible. "The thing is, I can provide the funding and the vision, but I need someone who's lived this life to help design the programs, to understand what these kids really need." Reba's eyes met his. "I need someone who can look at a 17-year-old sleeping in a shelter and see not a problem to be managed, but a person with unlimited potential." Patricia set down her coffee cup. "In the meantime, we'd like to set up a solo show of your work. Faces of Nashville. Portraits of the people you see every day on the streets. The tourists, the musicians, the workers, the dreamers. We split the proceeds 60-40 in your favor, and any pieces that don't sell become part of the foundation's permanent collection." Marcus's head was spinning. 2 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether he could afford new brushes. Now he was being offered a full scholarship, representation by a prestigious gallery, and the chance to help build something that could change lives. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "I mean, I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express. But why are you willing to invest so much in someone you just met?" Reba was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what I saw when I looked at that portrait you painted of me?" Marcus shook his head. "I saw hope," she said simply. "Not just the technical skill, though that's impressive. I saw someone who could look at the world around them, a world that hasn't been particularly kind, and still find beauty worth capturing, still believe in dreams worth chasing." She reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. "That's not common, Marcus. That combination of talent and resilience and optimism, that's rare." "There's one condition," Patricia added, and Marcus's heart sank slightly. He'd learned to be wary of conditions and catches. "You have to let us help you get your stolen artwork back. All of it. Jake Morrison has been selling your pieces for months, apparently. We want to track down every buyer, explain the situation, and either purchase the works back or arrange for proper attribution and compensation." "That could be expensive," Marcus said. "That's our problem, not yours," Reba replied firmly. "Your job is to keep creating, to go to school, and to help us figure out how to build something that makes sure the next Marcus Thompson doesn't have to wait 3 years for someone to notice his talent." Marcus looked around the coffee shop, at the comfortable chairs, the warm lighting, the other patrons engaged in their own conversations about projects and dreams and possibilities. A month ago, he would never have imagined himself in a place like this, having a conversation like this. Now, it felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, being invited to jump towards something he couldn't quite see, but somehow knew he needed to trust. "What about the shelter?" he asked. "The people there have become my family. I can't just abandon them." "You're not abandoning anyone," Reba said. "We'll help you find appropriate housing. Nothing fancy, but your own space. And part of the foundation work will involve partnering with organizations like the Nashville Rescue Mission. You'll still be connected to that community, but as someone who can offer resources and opportunities, instead of just surviving alongside them." Marcus thought about Emma, about David Rodriguez, about all the people he'd met who had talents and dreams, but no clear path forward. Could Emma be part of this? Emma Foster. She's 17, still at the shelter, and she's been learning to draw. She's got potential. Reba and Patricia exchanged glances. Absolutely, Patricia said. In fact, that's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Someone who understands that talent exists everywhere, not just in the places society thinks to look for it. As they talked through the details, timelines, logistics, legal paperwork, Marcus found himself thinking about his parents. They had been teachers, both of them, convinced that education could change everything. They had died before they could see their son graduate from high school. But somehow, Marcus thought they would approve of this path he was about to take. "I have one request," Marcus said, as the meeting began to wind down. "What's that?" Reba asked. "When we do the gallery show, when we announce the foundation, when any of this becomes public, I want people to know that it started with someone believing in me. But I also want them to know that for every Marcus Thompson who gets this chance, there are dozens who don't. I want this to be bigger than just my story." Reba smiled, the same warm, genuine expression Marcus had tried to capture in his portrait. "Honey, I think you're going to do just fine." As they prepared to leave, Marcus realized he was crying. Not from sadness or desperation, as he had so many nights in the shelter, but from the overwhelming recognition that his life had just changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. Outside the coffee shop, Nashville hummed with its usual energy. Musicians carried guitar cases toward recording sessions. Tourists photographed famous landmarks. And somewhere on Broadway, another street artist was probably setting up their easel, hoping for enough commissions to make it through another day. But for Marcus Thompson, the view looked entirely different now. It looked like home. 3 months later, the Hartwell Contemporary Gallery buzzed with an energy unlike anything Patricia had seen in her 20-year career. The opening night of Faces of Nashville, Portraits by Marcus Thompson, had drawn a crowd that spilled out onto the sidewalk. A mix of Nashville's art establishment, country music industry figures, and, perhaps most importantly, people from the streets and shelters who had never set foot in a gallery before. Marcus stood near his portrait of Emma, watching her face as she saw her own image displayed with museum-quality lighting and professional framing. She had started classes at Nashville Community College the month before, part of the expanded scholarship program that Reba's foundation had established. "I still can't believe that's me," Emma whispered, tears in her eyes. The painting showed her working on a sketch in the shelter's common room, her face lit with concentration and determination. Marcus had captured something essential about her spirit, the resilience that had carried her through years of uncertainty. "Believe it," Marcus said. "That's exactly how I see you." Across the room, Reba moved through the crowd with the ease of someone comfortable in any setting. She stopped frequently to discuss individual pieces with guests, but Marcus noticed she spent the most time with the visitors who looked uncomfortable in the upscale environment. People from the shelter, street performers, young artists who had heard about the show through word of mouth rather than engraved invitations. David Rodriguez from the Nashville Rescue Mission stood before a large canvas depicting the shelter's evening meal service. Marcus had painted it from memory, showing not just the practical reality of people in line for food, but the community that existed there, conversations and laughter, and small acts of kindness that sustained people through difficult times. "You captured it perfectly," David said when Marcus joined him. "This is what people don't understand about places like the Mission. They see poverty and problems, but you painted the humanity." "That's all I've ever tried to do," Marcus replied. "Show people the way I see them." A commotion near the gallery's entrance drew their attention. Jake Morrison had arrived, looking uncomfortable in borrowed dress clothes, his eyes darting nervously around the crowd. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He hadn't spoken to Jake since discovering the theft. Hadn't known if he would show up tonight despite the invitation Marcus had asked David to extend. "Marcus!" Jake approached hesitantly. I wasn't sure you'd want me here." "I wasn't sure either," Marcus admitted honestly. "But I'm glad you came." Jake looked around at the paintings. His actions had inadvertently helped make this possible, though not in the way he'd intended. "I brought you something," he said, pulling a small canvas from a worn grocery bag. It was one of Marcus's earlier works, a street scene Jake had taken from the shelter months before. "I never sold this one," Jake said quietly. "I kept thinking I would, but I couldn't. It reminded me too much of when I first came to Nashville, you know? Full of dreams and thinking everything would work out." He handed the painting to Marcus. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry." Marcus looked at the painting, one of his first attempts at capturing Broadway's energy, technically imperfect but full of raw emotion. "Jake, what you did hurt, but it also taught me something important about protecting my work, about understanding its value. And in a weird way, it led to all of this." He gestured around the gallery. "I'm not saying I'm grateful you stole from me, but I forgive you." Jake's eyes filled with tears. "I've been clean for 60 days now," he said quietly. "Got into a program. I'm trying to make things right." "That's good, Jake. That's really good." Marcus paused, then made a decision that surprised even him. "You know, we're going to need people at the foundation. People who understand what it's like to hit bottom and claw your way back up. If you're interested..." Before Jake could respond, Patricia appeared at Marcus's elbow. "Marcus, there's someone here who'd like to meet you." She led him toward a distinguished older man in an expensive suit who was studying the centerpiece of the exhibition, the portrait of Reba that had started everything. "Marcus Thompson," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Charles Whitfield, director of the Frist Art Museum. This portrait is extraordinary. The emotional depth, the technical precision, it's museum-quality work." Marcus shook his hand, still adjusting to interactions with people from Nashville's cultural establishment. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you. I understand you're currently enrolled at Nashville Community College?" "Yes, sir. Evening classes, while I work on the foundation project during the day." Charles nodded approvingly. "How would you feel about a guest lecturing position? Nothing too formal. Just sharing your perspective with our students a few times a semester. Young artists need to understand that inspiration and opportunity can come from anywhere." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself in conversation after conversation. Gallery owners from other cities interested in showing his work, journalists wanting to write about his story, collectors inquiring about commissions. But the moments that meant the most were the quieter ones. Sarah Williams, the nurse who had first encouraged him to apply for school, beaming with pride as she introduced him to her friends. Tommy Chen from the corner market, dressed in his best suit, telling anyone who would listen that he had discovered Marcus months ago. Near the end of the evening, Marcus noticed a young man about his own age standing alone in front of the portrait of Emma. The stranger had the lean, hungry look Marcus recognized immediately. The careful way of moving that came from never being quite sure where you'd sleep that night. "Beautiful work," the young man said when Marcus approached. "Thank you. I'm Marcus, the artist. I know who you are." The young man's voice carried a slight accent. Southern, but not Tennessee. "I'm Daniel Cooper. I hitchhiked here from Alabama when I heard about this show, about what Miss McEntire is doing with the foundation." "You're an artist?" Daniel pulled out a battered sketchbook, its pages worn soft from constant use. The drawings inside took Marcus's breath away. Intricate pencil portraits that captured not just physical features, but something essential about each subject's character. "These are incredible," Marcus said, flipping through page after page of stunning work. "Where did you learn to draw like this?" Same place you learned to paint, I expect. By doing it every day because I had to. Because it was the only thing that made sense, when nothing else did. Daniel closed the sketchbook carefully. I'm not asking for charity, Marcus, but I heard that your foundation might have space for people like us. Marcus looked at this young man who could have been his reflection from a year ago. Talented, desperate, proud, and trying not to show how scared he was. Daniel, I think we definitely have space for people like us. As the gallery began to empty, Marcus found himself standing with Reba in front of the portrait that had changed everything. The painting looked different now, displayed professionally with dramatic lighting that brought out every brush stroke. But what struck Marcus wasn't the technical aspects. It was the hope he had somehow captured in Reba's expression. Hope that had turned out to be prophetic. "Penny for your thoughts," Reba said. "I was thinking about time," Marcus replied. 3 months ago, I was worried about whether I could afford dinner. Tonight, I sold 12 paintings, got offered a teaching position, and met 5 young artists who want to be part of what we're building. It doesn't seem real. It's real, honey. And this is just the beginning. Reba gestured toward a wall where architectural plans for the foundation's permanent space were displayed. Construction starts next month. By this time next year, we'll have 20 young people in our first class. Artists, musicians, writers, all of them kids who've been overlooked by traditional systems. Marcus studied the plans. The building would house studio spaces, practice rooms, living quarters for students who needed them, and a gallery for showcasing their work. It would be located in East Nashville, in a neighborhood where many of the city's struggling artists and musicians lived. "What are you going to call it?" Marcus asked. Reba smiled. "We were thinking, the Thompson Center for Creative Arts." Marcus stared at her. "You can't. That's not. You're funding it. Your name should be on it." "Marcus, this whole thing exists because a 19-year-old kid sleeping in a shelter refused to give up on his dreams, and because his art was so honest and powerful that it stopped a famous country singer in her tracks on Broadway." Reba's voice was firm. "Besides, I have plenty of buildings with my name on them. I want this one to be about the future, not the past." As the last guests filtered out into the Nashville night, Marcus helped Patricia and the gallery staff carefully remove the paintings from the walls. Each piece would be professionally packed and delivered to its new owner, except for a few that Marcus was donating to the permanent collection of organizations like the Nashville Rescue Mission. Emma waited for him by the door, practically glowing with excitement. "Marcus, a woman from the Tennessee Arts Council wants me to apply for a summer internship program." "An internship? 6 months ago, I was worried about aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I'm worried about whether I can handle a college course load and an internship at the same time," Emma laughed. "Much better problems to have." Outside the gallery, the streets of Nashville pulsed with their usual energy. Musicians carried guitar cases toward late-night gigs. Tourists wandered between honky-tonks. And somewhere in the distance, a street performer played a melody that drifted on the autumn air. Marcus looked up at the stars, barely visible above the city lights, and thought about his parents. They would have loved this night, not just his success, but the way that success was already reaching out to touch other lives. His father had always said that the best teachers were the ones who created more teachers, and his mother had believed that art could change the world one person at a time. "Ready to go home?" Reba asked, walking up beside him. She had insisted on giving him a ride back to his new apartment. Nothing fancy, but his own space, with good light for painting and enough room for Emma to visit and work on her own art. "Yeah," Marcus said, taking one last look at the gallery where his paintings had hung alongside works by established artists, where his story had become part of Nashville's larger narrative about dreams and determination and the power of believing in people who had been written off by the world. As they drove through the city that had become his home, Marcus thought about the young man he'd been just a few months ago, painting portraits for $25 and sleeping in a shelter bed. That person seemed like someone from another lifetime. But Marcus knew he was still in there somewhere, still hungry, still hopeful, still seeing beauty in places where others saw only struggle. The difference was that now he had the tools to do something with that vision and the platform to help others find their own tools. The ripple effect that had started with a stolen painting and a chance encounter on Broadway was just beginning to spread across the city, touching lives he'd never meet, inspiring dreams he'd never know about. But that, Marcus thought, as Nashville's lights blurred past the car window, was exactly as it should be. The best kind of art didn't just hang on gallery walls. It lived in the world, changing people and communities in ways both seen and unseen. And somewhere in the city tonight, another young artist was probably setting up an easel on a street corner, hoping for enough commissions to make it through another day, carrying dreams that seemed impossible but weren't. Not if the right person happened to walk by at exactly the right moment and saw not just the struggle, but the unlimited potential that struggle could create. The story was far from over. In many ways, Marcus realized, it was just beginning. True, 1 year later, the Thompson Center for Creative Arts buzzed with activity on its first anniversary. Students worked in bright, airy studios while visitors toured the facilities, and in the main gallery, a new exhibition showcased work by the center's inaugural class of 20 young artists. Marcus stood in the courtyard, watching Daniel Cooper teach a drawing workshop to a group of teenagers who had recently aged out of foster care. Nearby, Emma led a discussion about art history with students from 3 different high schools, while Jake Morrison, now 18 months sober, and the center's resident coordinator, helped a new arrival settle into the dormitory. A news crew from CNN was filming a segment about innovative approaches to youth homelessness, and the reporter had just finished interviewing Reba about the foundation's expansion plans. Similar centers were being planned for 3 other cities, each designed around the specific needs and artistic traditions of their communities. "Proud of what you've built here?" Sarah Williams asked, joining Marcus in the courtyard. She had become the center's volunteer medical coordinator, ensuring that students received proper health care while pursuing their artistic education. "We've all built it," Marcus corrected, gesturing toward the bustling activity around them. "That's what makes it work." His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Just sold 3 pieces from your new series. The Hometown Heroes portraits are generating serious interest from collectors in New York. Time to start thinking about your next solo show?" Marcus smiled and tucked the phone away. Success in the art world still felt surreal, but it had also become a tool rather than a destination, a way to fund more scholarships, support more young artists, and prove to a skeptical world that talent and determination could emerge from the most unexpected places. "Marcus!" Daniel called from across the courtyard. "We need you to settle an argument about perspective techniques." As Marcus walked toward the group of eager students, he caught sight of his reflection in the window of the main building. The young man looking back at him wore clean clothes that fit properly, carried himself with confidence instead of defensive wariness, and had paint stains on his hands, not from desperation, but from choice. But the eyes were the same, still seeing beauty in broken places, still believing in the power of art to transform both creators and observers, still remembering what it felt like to have nothing and be grateful for everything. And that, Marcus thought, as he joined his students in their spirited debate about light and shadow, was exactly the way it should be. The best kind of success didn't erase where you came from. It gave you the power to lift others up from that same place, creating ripples that spread far beyond anything you could imagine while sitting on a sidewalk with a $25 easel and impossible dreams. The story that had begun with colors on Broadway had become something much larger, a testament to the transformative power of believing in people who had been forgotten, and proof that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the most unlikely places. In the distance, Nashville hummed with its eternal energy, and somewhere in the city, another young dreamer was probably picking up a brush for the first time, unknowingly beginning a journey that might someday change not just their own life, but the lives of countless others they had yet to meet. The canvas of possibility stretched endlessly ahead, waiting to be filled with colors not yet imagined.